with Bharat Innovation Fund, based at incubator at IIM Ahmedabad, and we've been investing through this for last couple of years. It's an early stage deep tech fund investing across sectors. My personal background and interest is more in the food and agricultural supply chain. Been investing in the food supply chain for more than 10 years, and more recently in the agri-tech startup and food tech startup. Working very closely with many of them directly also as mentor, board member, and investor. In addition, I also work with few foundations, DFIs, and international investors who are looking to invest in this sector in India. Being part of IIT Mandi Catalyst for last 3 years, I've been there multiple times. Beautiful campus, and have really enjoyed my association. The team out there, I think it's a brilliant team. Of course, we are now in a very unprecedented situation, and we are kind of seeing a lot of challenges in the startup ecosystem, which we have built over last decade or so. The challenges are typically that the revenues have dried down, or the runway which startups have to survive actually has been shortened. There's a survey today in one of the newspapers which said that 70% of startups have only 3 months runway. So I think that's kind of a scary situation, not just for startups, but also for the investors who have put in their money and their heart and soul in building those startups. So yes, we need to accept it's a once in a century kind of an event which none of us predicted. Having said that, I think every crisis does give us an opportunity to relook at our business models, to recalibrate, to pivot, and to figure out how do we sort of move on from here, right? So essentially, which everyone is saying, survival to revival. So I think that's the challenge. Not just startups are facing, but I think everyone in the country, be it a shopkeeper or be it a MSME or be it a corporate, I think everyone is trying to figure that out. So that's the reason of planning this session. And frankly, I don't want it to be monologue. You guys know your business best, and the whole idea is to make it more interactive. Understand what you guys are up to. I don't know many of you, so it will be good to sort of hear you out. If you have any concerns, questions, I'm happy to discuss that. So that was the whole idea. I don't have a presentation or a sort of a speech. So to say, all I can say, yes, it's a tough time. We need to figure out how to get over next 3 to 6 months or maybe a year. The good part of the whole crisis is that there is a lot of focus on sustainability of business rather than building scalable business. So the ones who are kind of surviving in this situation are the ones which have had a decent bottom line, which have always focused on building sustainable businesses. Unfortunately, if you look at the Indian startup ecosystem over the last 10 to 15 years, a lot of money has been poured in to build scale, which need not necessarily be the right thing to do. So the whole message which is coming, build sustainable businesses, build businesses which are cash positive, and build businesses which are solving real problems, right? So the kind of action that we have seen in, for example, healthcare startups, in the food supply chain startup is unprecedented. The kind of surge that we have seen in volumes of transactions in the order book has, it's like 3x, 4x of a normal kind of a situation. So yes, it has also thrown up opportunities. It has it has brought a few sectors in limelight. It has pushed back a few sectors, and it is bound to sort of, that volatility and uncertainty is going to survive. So we have to live with it. Um, so the only message probably that I want to give you today is, yes, these are challenging times, and it's quite possible that many startups may have to fold up. But those who can, survive through these times will come out stronger, will be much better placed to sort of grab the opportunity. The kind of reformist agenda that we have seen from the government over the last couple of weeks is also unprecedented. The sectors which have always struggled to grow because of policy complexities or lack of clarity, etc., have got a boost. More than the money, I would say it's the policy reforms, which to me sounds very exciting and positive in some of the sectors which were always challenged by the policy issues. So I think it's all about how to get over the next few months. I always say that it's not never easy to quit entrepreneurship, and that's the advice I want to give it to you today. That stay invested. It will take time. You have been working hard to build something which I'm sure is close to your heart. So don't quit on it. Of course, you need to figure out the way to get through the current crisis. But my guess is there are empty number of opportunities waiting. There are empty number of business models which can be created in this crisis, which we never thought of. So have a balanced approach to what's going to happen, not necessarily extremely pessimistic approach, which in general is prevailing across all sections of the society in this situation. So yeah, that's the broader message. I'm happy to hear you out. You want to share what you're doing, what challenges you're facing. I'm happy to discuss and also bring in other participants on the call. So probably I'll pause here. I'll leave the floor open for any introductions, questions, suggestions.
Sure, Hemendra. Thanks for your input. So I think startups have started throwing their questions. So one startup, Ganesh from Neshaju, he is into e-waste collection, and they are looking to collect e-waste as a donation using donate e-waste to support farmers. They will contribute 20 to 30% of e-waste value per kg to farmers. Will this purpose-driven marketing will create a positive and negative impact on their brand building?
Okay, Manveen, if you don't mind, can you unmute the person, because it's a small group. It's okay if someone wants to speak up. It will be easier for me to understand their question and answer accordingly.
Yeah,
Others
sure. Sure. Okay. So, Ganesh, if you can ask your question directly.
Ganesh, are you there?
So, Hemendra, if you can check the chat box, there's the question.
Right. I can see the question, but I just want to check whether Ganesh is on the call. Otherwise, we can move to the next question.
Yeah, he is on the call, but I don't know why he's not able to unmute himself.
Okay.
Ganesh, can you hear us?
Okay, maybe we can come to him later. I think it'll be important for me to understand the question correctly before I answer it. Maybe we can go to Raghavendra.
Okay, we can ask, Raghavendra. Raghavendra?
Hello. Hi, Hemendra. How are you? We are basically, if you remember, working on commercializing industrial hemp And you asked for some problems that we are facing as such is basically our seeds are stuck somewhere in Europe. And because flights and import is all up in the air, and we have missed one season for planting it. So now we might have to wait post monsoons. So the seeding rate of the seeds, what seeds will we get, and will the supplier of the seeds give us fresh seeds and not the seeds that is already packed and waiting, is the things we're dealing with. And the second thing I'm dealing with is how would I do interstate movement, because we are based out of Uttarakhand and I am in Delhi, and how can I cross the border, because Delhi is red, Uttarakhand, our district, is kind of orange. So these are the problems that we are facing. But apart from that, I wanted your opinion. Is agri-tech as a sector, many people are suggesting that it won't face these many problems and it should pick up, and also because there's lots of labor which has gone back home. So in that scenario, if we assume that to be correct, do you think it is positive for a manufacturing agri-tech startup to raise funding in this environment and go for a mechanized processing unit? And will there be funding available for something like that, or is it still app-based solutions or something like that? So yeah.
Yeah, and a good question, Raghavendra. So yeah, I know you have very specific problems, and I don't think I have a solution. It's lot of it is policy driven, and whenever the central government and the state government decide to open up, hopefully
Yes.
this will be solved. But to your next question, yes, it's a good time for agri-tech. In the last month or so, we have seen 4 deals closing. In this month, there are another 3 deals which are closing. So there is a sudden upsurge in the deal volume that we are seeing in the sector. The only question was of app versus manufacturing. I think there is enough potential for manufacturing in agriculture also, which we haven't explored in certain niches and pockets. For example, let's say farm level processing, primary processing. These models haven't really sort of got the attention they deserve in terms of you know the ability to build scalable business models. Of course, there is a strong case for reducing food wastage, for improving shelf life, for value addition, for more income in the hands of farmers. But they haven't been sort of got the money because of the set of investors who love the digital theme and haven't looked at manufacturing that closely. But I think what has become important in this crisis, of course, digital uh, has come as a very important segment as a mode of delivery, as a mode of interaction, as a mode of communication, right? But having said that, there has to be a supply chain which should run parallel to the digital mode, right? So to that extent, I see there's a potential. Of course, whatever you are trying to build, whatever you're trying to produce, has to have certain dimensions, depending on how the consumer behavior is going to change. For example, what I believe consumer behavior towards food safety, accountability in food supply chain will change drastically post the crisis. So can you build those solutions which is around healthy foods, functional foods, foods which can build immunity, and foods. Forget healthy food in India. A lot of food that we eat is adulterated, right? I think those will be questioned now, and that's where I believe there's an opportunity for building innovative niche models. Of course, on the manufacturing side, your products have to be differentiated. Um, and what I think will become more important is your ability to build distribution channels. The Kirana has come out very strong in this crisis. I think that fear that e-com would take over or modern trade would take over Kirana, I don't think is going to happen in India. So how do you build your distribution channels? Unfortunately, there are enough brand agnostic distribution models which are emerging in India, like Shop Kirana or a Jumbo Tail, etc. So for any brand which is into essentially where your expertise or your forte is in manufacturing, I think they used to always struggle with access to the retail and distribution network because it wasn't available. My guess is those things will get solved. So there's a potential for new product development. There's a potential for developing a lot of innovative food products, innovative brand, etc. I don't think we haven't really explored the potential of innovation in the food category as much, given the size of opportunity. So yeah, I think I stay positively biased towards agriculture and even agriculture on the manufacturing side. Whether investors will come in, not come in, I think my guess is, you should always build business which are sustainable. If they come in, great. If they don't come in, you still have a business in hand, right? So never build a business just thinking about the next investor. And that's where my frustration with some of the startups, they end up spending 50% of their time fundraising, which is not the right utilization of time. So I think that's the overall perspective. Of course, we can get into detail if you have a plan in mind, probably offline to discuss it further.
Yes, Hemendra, I'll do that. If you remember, I came for Krishi Manthan and you were in Delhi that time, and I was in IIM Ahmedabad. So yeah, I missed you there, but I'll take this offline. So
Sure, Raghavendra. I look forward to meet you.
okay, take care. Bye. Thank you.
Anyone else who wants to come in?
I am there. Ganesh Chari here.
Ganesh. Ganesh, I read your question, but if you can explain it, I'll probably be able to respond to it.
Yeah, we were just thinking of, in the beginning, we had a plan of purchasing the e-waste for recycling. And right now it is a situation where we are shortage of funds and all like that. So we thought over an idea of putting a purpose-driven marketing. So we are thinking of every donation of e-waste will contribute 20 to 30% to the farmer as a benefit, so that people get motivated to donate their e-waste rather than selling it off. So this one will help us to sustain our business over a long time like that. So when we are doing this one, will it have a negative impact on our business, or it will have a positive impact on our business? That is what I was looking for your view on that.
Okay, so instead of you paying for it, they donate it to you, right? And you use it for
Recycling. Yeah.
Okay. So what are you fearing if you move to this model? What is your fear?
Now, there may be some situation where people may think like, no, we are trying to make money by putting farmer at the forefront, like shooting from their shoulder. So will that kind of the talk will come into the picture of the customer mind, or that was the thing. We had done a survey of almost 125 people over a phone before deciding on this model.
Okay, that's great. So frankly, if you're raising any donations or philanthropic money with an objective of helping the underserved, be it farming community or anyone else, I think it's very important that you have high degree of accountability to that money. You have to give confidence to the donor that it's being utilized for the purpose for which it was being collected. And that credibility is key. If you look at the largest philanthropic organization across the world, be it Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, be it Ford Foundation or any foundation, they're very particular that how the money is going to be utilized, and they typically take a lot of time figuring out the right partner. They do a lot of diligence on them to make sure that the money is not suboptimally utilized or in extreme cases siphoned off or something else.
Yeah.
I think that is critical.
I will just add on that one. So we have partnered with one of the NGO which is based out of Bangalore, but it's working across Karnataka, and money will be utilized to train farmers for natural farming. So we are going to take a responsibility of these 15 farmer families, and 5 trainers from the farmer category only will be utilized for this, and we will sustain all this expenses through this contribution. So it is not like we will be directly transferring the money to the farmers. It will be used to train the farmer for the natural or organic farming.
That's a good thought. All I'm saying, just make sure that you keep a proper records of all the money which is being spent in the training, right? This NGO that you're partnering with has a good reputation, and I think it's a good practice to keep your donors informed in terms of what's going on, what kind of impact it has created, right? Even if it's a one-time donation and probably you don't have a sort of responsibility to report it back, but to create confidence, I think it's always good to report back how the money has been utilized and what kind of impact it has created. So I think as long as you are true to your words, I don't see anything being wrong here.
Okay.
And it can also go parallelly to your conventional e-waste
Yes.
collection.
Yeah. So that manufacturers and all will be purchasing the e-waste, but this is for the individual people where the cost of getting the things on board or going and collecting, so transportation and all this is the thing which consumes lot of energy, manpower and money. So we were just thinking for that kind of customer, this is the strategy. And also regarding the traceability of the funds or something like that, so we'll be sharing every month at the end of the month the progress report or the report on how the fund has been collected, how much it has been collected, and how much is being utilized for the farmer and who are that farmers. So that details will be given to the contributors on a regular basis. That we are scheduling for a monthly basis reporting.
Sure. Ganesh. I think I think if intent is good, I don't see a problem, and I think it's a cause worth trying, and of course you can still continue even if this crisis is over. You can still allocate some part of the money coming for these kind of purposes, so that's absolutely fine.
Thank you so much for your input.
Anyone else wants to come in?
Yeah, I would like to go okay, I'll go then. So, hi Amendra, Arjun this side. We interacted briefly during the HST meet also. We are building a decision support system to assist in the diagnosis of rare diseases. So my question is that we are getting some decent response from an investor whom we can call as a strategic investor, because he's an MD of another laboratory who's running these genetic based tests. So what I want to ask is that how do you see a potential, strategic investor? We can't say strategic because it's not the laboratory who will invest directly, but it's the MD of the laboratory who wants to who may want to invest in the company. So what would be your view on taking money from that kind of a stakeholder at a seed stage level, given that a laboratory is going to be a significant revenue generation segment for us going forward?
So the person is investing in his individual capacity, right?
Yes.
And you're confident that that he'll honor the confidentiality and can avoid future potential conflicts with laboratory that he's operating. Is that an agreement with him? Is it more verbal? Is it written? Or are there any discussions on that?
So his team has already engaged with me twice. I've already, they've taken product demo, they've tried the product. Now they've recommended me to the MD, and we are kind of having a discussion where what kind of engagement model we can have, because the infrastructure that we have built will actually bring about a lot of automation in the lab system. So they are desperate for a solution, that I know. And the other thing is that given that he has this kind of a lab and he's operating in our industry, I feel he will be the one of the few people who will understand this business really quickly. But the risk that I see is not necessarily on the confidentiality side. The risk that I see is that, will he try to move our company in the direction that it gets tied back to his laboratory in some way? Or, are there ways to protect that? Or how would a third investor, maybe in the next round of investment, how will they view this entire arrangement with a strategic early on? But yes, he will invest in his personal capacity, and he's actually invested $1 million or so in another health tech startup last year. So there is some confidence that, okay, he's gone out and invested in other health tech companies also.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in your assessment, usually it's a tricky situation to get money from a strategic or perceived strategic guy early on your journey, because then it kind of creates a perception among the incoming investor that there's not enough value to be unlocked, and it is a quasi captive company of the strategic, right? So I think that's the general landscape. So I think what you need to do here is, he may be strategic in nature, but as far as the investment is concerned, it has to be a pure financial investment, right? With no preferential rights for business in favor of his laboratory. So, for example, if he's working, let's say, theoretically for Path Lab, and an SRL wants to come in and take his solution, he shouldn't have any right to block those kind of potential business opportunities for you, right? And if there's any IP involved, then I think you need to protect it. That's extremely critical. So it's good to take money from someone who understands the business, but the lens has to be a financial investment than a strategic investment. I think that's a fine line out there. I think if he's from the industry and is investing in other startups, he should also, because he's also won't be able to unlock the value unless you get an opportunity to do business development with, let's say, 10 other laboratories like him, right? So I think that's where the sort of challenge is. You need to have a conversation around it. You need to have a proper documentation around it, so that for any incoming investor, you can give enough confidence that this, मतलब उसका तो ही challenge वो देखता है incoming investor, is it causing any potential loss of sale, and second, is it causing any potential sort of block to the exit routes, right? Because everyone wants to unlock the value at the maximum when you are exiting, right? So is it anyway blocking that opportunity? So I think that clarity, conversation, confidence, and documentation is critical for you to receive the money.
Sure. And just one quick question follow up on that. So do you think that we can get away, or it will be even smart or fair enough to say something like, maybe you don't get a board seat or anything like that? Will that be like purely stupid thing to say, or just so that we can, have him as a advisor come investor, but he cannot influence really the decision making, the core decision making in the company?
Yeah, I think absolutely that's important. So that's where what rights you assign to him is extremely important. Whether it's board right, whether it's information right, whether it is sort of any other possible right which can potentially impact your business. So you have to weigh all that. I don't know whether you discussed the term sheet, but you have to be careful. It's not just money and the valuation, but what are the other rights which are going with it is extremely critical. So, and frankly, for angel investors, usually board seat is something you have to be very careful. It's because it becomes a contentious point when an institutional investor comes in, right? And if the angel investor is not willing to move, and if he has some preferred rights, then it becomes a conflicting situation. And as you keep getting new investors, everyone demanding a board seat, board becomes too difficult to manage. For personally, in my experience, beyond a number of 5 to 6, it's a very, very difficult task. Only probably large corporates can do justice to a board larger than this. Otherwise, for most startups, I think something like 5 to 6 members is probably good at the most. So first you have to weigh in with on whatever rights you have been negotiating with them. What are the pros and cons, and take a call. A board right for sure is a sensitive, very sensitive right. Unless you feel very strongly about it, you shouldn't give it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Arjun. Anyone else wants to come in?
I think Srinivas has a question. Srinivas, you can go ahead. Srinivas, can you hear me?
Okay, we can go to the next one. I think Pooja Thakur has a question. Pooja, you want to ask?
Sir, actually, I don't have a question. I just answered the Srinivas question and put up some my views on his question.
Okay.
Srinivas, are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Hemendra. This is Srinivas. We met briefly. I was to meet you in Delhi when the whole metro line got disrupted. From Cool Crop. Basically, I had a couple of questions. One was on this: how do you create a kind of an off-taker e-marketplace to let's say stimulate a local economy rather than getting onto the let's say the big baskets of the world or the Amazon Freshes of the world? How do we create? Are there any such e-marketplaces, regional e-marketplaces? A, and B, which I think Pooja answered in some sense, but I wanted to hear your take on that. What is this? What is your take on this eNAM platform with the kind of conflicting signals that one gets? Where on one hand we talk about removing APMC, and on the second hand we talk about eNAM, which basically talks about modernizing the APMC. So what is your take on these 2 or 3 questions that I had?
Thanks, Srinivas, and good to reconnect. Yeah. So on the e-marketplaces which are more local, hyper local, even I believe post this crisis we will see some sort of hyper localization of the supply chains which are considered to be essential. It could be food or non-food. The challenge in the food category has been, except for the vegetables which are typically grown across regions and sort of in many ways probably climate agnostic, you can grow within 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers. But when it comes to certain kind of fruits, for example, let's say lychee comes all the way from Bihar, right? Because that's where all the orchards are, right? If you look at Daseri, or if you look at Alfonso, they are grown in a certain region, right? So I doubt we can, or at least in the near term, it doesn't look feasible that we can create the entire fruit basket within a certain radius of consumption center. Likewise for staples, there are certain regions which grow paddy, some grow maize, some grow wheat, some grow sugarcane. So I think that regional dependence would still remain. But what can change is potential to store it, mill it, process it near the consumption center. So let's say there are 60 cities in India, which is more than 1 million population, right? and they want to create a self-reliant supply chain for essential commodities. There could be models where you can have a whatever is not available, you create infrastructure to store it, you know, in the time of such crisis, or probably for making supply chain more smoother, assuming the demand is huge out there. Another area which I feel bullish about, which can probably take off, is around controlled agriculture. It could be farming, open farming with some sort of controls, or it could be polyhouses or hydroponics or aquaponics, etc. Of course, the front end investment is very high, but the productivity pays for it. You know, typically the productivity levels are like 5x to 10x vis-a-vis normal conventional agriculture. The challenge is you have to put upfront investment, let's say about 1 crore per hectare or something like that. But having said that, I think this crisis will definitely pivot some of the models to become more local marketplaces rather than a pan-India kind of a thing. If not a city specific, maybe a state specific or a region specific. I don't think it's possible for all the products. But yeah, you never know, maybe 60-70% of the product you can source from, let's say, within 100-kilometer radius. That'll be great. I think it can have positive impacts in 2 or 3 things. One is, I think, reduction in food miles. If you can achieve that, that'll be great. Because logistic cost is a significant cost, at least in the food products. And I think second is the wastage. You know, if you are growing near to consumption, typically the wastage, post-harvest challenges can be taken care of. So yeah, I think the answer is somewhere in between. I think there will be some investments to build those supply chains. It will be possible in some categories and probably not possible in some of those. Coming to your next question on Enam. So frankly, when Enam was launched, it was essentially, most of the traders were coming on the platform. That was one thing which was happening. And secondly, a lot of offline transactions were getting recorded on Enam. So it was not an Enam in the true spirit as it was conceived. But I think what I'm hearing, and of course I need to check that out, at least in last few weeks, maybe, I don't know, maybe few hundred to 1,000 odd mandis have got associated with sort of connected to Enam. And so that's a positive sign. But I think the important part is the question that I have in mind, and I don't have the answer. Is it the trader who's transacting, or is it the farmer who's transacting? If we have to really make most of Enam, ultimately the farmer participation has to go up significantly. So I think that's one thing which I guess should happen. Probably this crisis will push towards that. I think second challenge which we need to solve for Enam to become a sort of a, let's say, a normal mode of operations or transactions is solve for grades and standards. In most products in agricultural sort of produce, since the grades are not very well defined, it's very difficult to do a remote transaction, right? So either you build in the laboratories with wherever an APMC is, and before you put your product on the platform for bidding, you have a objective definition that, let's say, rice of this size, this length, and this variety, basmati, non-basmati. So if I'm bidding from a remote location, I know what I'm bidding for, right? So I think there has to be, there could be a lot of digital solutions. So at least in last 3 to 5 years, we have seen multiple startups using image processing, computer vision to do it in like seconds and very objective. At least in the physical side, I think they've achieved a pretty good accuracy levels, likes of Intalo Labs and Agrix and AgNext, Qzens, Occipetal, there are multiple such startups who've done a fantastic job in building image processing solutions for grading and sorting. So I think those need to be integrated for transactions to multiply, because if there's a lot of subjectivity, then it's difficult to transact online, right? Like, unlike, let's say, Amazon, you order a mobile phone, an Apple iPhone, it's Apple iPhone, right? What's going to arrive at your place is the same phone. But in agricultural commodities, it need not be true that what you're ordering for is what you ultimately get, right? I think that trust need to be built in the platform with more objective solutions around grades and standards. I think that's another important factor for ELAM to take off. Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
that's my answer. Of course, I need to figure out a way in terms of what's going on. Of course, what I'm hearing is very positive, that the number of mandis who want to go in our route is increasing by the day.
Thanks, Hemendra. I'll probably touch base with you one-on-one on some ideas that I have for specific to Himachal Pradesh, so that I would. I'll probably text you before I give you a call.
Sure.
Thanks, Hemendra. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Shini.
Hi, Hemendra. Kumar this side from Foodgram. We are into aggregation of dhabas, assuring minimum hygiene on highways. I have a couple of questions. Since you are in food tech space, how do you see investments in coming in this space first? And second, what's your thought on the debt part or the debt financing part for startup, especially when I am talking about the banks? Since they always look for a capital a heavy business model before they sanction loan, and given that we have moratorium for 12 months and the interest rate are attractive, how do you think this will help startups or MSMEs in specific? Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of interest from investors, I think one thing which has been proven over last couple of months is that the food and agriculture sector has a lot of defensibility, right? Because this is food consumption, even in recessionary economy or difficult times, it doesn't go down, or even if it goes down, it is not as significant as you've seen a lot of discretionary items. I think one thing which has been proven, that this is a very, very defensible, highly resilient sector, and that's why we have seen, as I was mentioning earlier during the call, that a lot of startups, even in COVID times, got funding. Maybe 4 to 5 deals have closed, another 3 to 5 are closing. So it's not bad that in 3 months, if 8 to 10 deals are closing. So I think investors are warming up to it. Of course, it can change for good if you look at only the startup funding in the agriculture and food space. And I'm talking more upstream investment than downstream, leaving out Zomatos and Swiggies and big baskets of the world, which are essentially front-end models. The upstream part has been, cumulative investment in last 5 to 6 years is about $550 million. And out of that, about $300 million has come in last 15 months. So you can see that there is clearly inflection point now where, investors are willing to put more money. Initially, it was more impact investors and more sort of sector focused fund who were looking at it. But I think the investor base is getting diversified now. We are seeing likes of Excel and a Sequoia and a Tiger and a Sama, investing in the sector, which is a good sign. Because unless you see that as an investor, impact investors or seed investors used to put in seed money pre-series A, at most series A. But if you don't have visibility of investors which can come in another round, they are always scared what's going to happen if no one turns up in the next round. I think that is kind of getting addressed. Having said that, the investment in the sector in context of the size of opportunities, in the context of the total early stage and VC funding which happens in India on an average $10 billion a year, I think it's still a very like a drop in the ocean. But I think things are changing for good, and one of the reasons for that is the quality of entrepreneurs. As I've said on multiple webinars, that it's an unprecedented quality which I've seen in last few months, few years. I'm very smart people from technological background, from agricultural background, who coming and who understands the challenges, who brings a lot of tech solutions with process orientation, etc. So I think that's very positive. I remain bullish, and thanks to this crisis, this sector has got the attention which it deserves. So, so yeah, I feel good about it. What was the next question? Sorry, I missed that.
Okay, so I was asking, how do you see debt financing for startups and MSMEs going?
So yeah, that's one of the challenges. So there are like two or three kind of solution. One is venture debt. Venture debt usually comes into the companies which have a venture capital, right? So if a VC fund is investing, venture debt funds invest in those kind of companies. But again, there are like 5 or 6 venture debt funds. I don't know, the collective corpus maybe a few $100 million. Another challenge which most startup face is working capital financing. So I think that's where we need more creative or innovative financing instruments. Essentially, it is a domain of NBFCs who are willing to take that kind of a risk. Conventional banks, of course, have given debt here and there, but not at a scale. I think we need some sort of credit guarantee instruments, which can give more confidence for all these innovative business models. And I think we should look at the government announcement. They are saying first loss guarantee, credit guarantee for MSMEs. I don't know whether that includes startups. So I think we need those kind of instruments to sort of attract more debt financing from players who relatively want to be on the safer side, right? But particularly financing which is cash flow based and not collateral based. So yeah, there are few NBFCs in the agricultural space alone. There are like 4 or 5 NBFCs such as Samunati, Grameen Capital, Caspian, who are doing debt instruments now. So, and it is happening even in startups which are not profit making. It's essentially bill discounting. So if you have an invoice from a reputed buyer, you take the invoice to the NBFC and they'll discount it and give you the money, right? So I think those models have started to come in. I haven't seen too much action on the capex side because 70-80% models are still digital in the startup ecosystem. So I haven't seen too many term debt models for startups. So I think that's something I probably need to figure out. But all I can say, both working capital financing and venture debt financing, there is an opportunity which should come, and there should be more instrument. There should be more NBFCs who can potentially look at it. And it's a good question, and I always advise startups to start building some bit of credit history right from the beginning, not to go overboard and borrow. You have to figure out your cash flows and your ability to repay loans. But you start building credit history right from the beginning. It definitely helps you to access more money as debt and also reduce cost of capital over a period of time.
Thank you, Hemant. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come in? I also see Puran and Saurabh on the call. They may also share their perspective.
So I think there is one from Ansalya. Yeah, Ansalya, go ahead.
Hi, Hemendra. Milan here. So I have a question regarding what is your take on the having advisor on board before seed funding?
So yeah, no harm. It's always good to have good mentors and advisor right at the beginning, not for the namesake, but for those who can genuinely give you time and add value to your business. So the role of advisor typically is to guide you on your business models, help you in some technical validation, help you in customer acquisition, help you get access to good investors, right? Or help you in some specific aspects, let's say marketing, distribution, branding, R&D, etc. So I think you should be clear what are you seeking from your advisor or a mentor. Typically, they also help you avoid making mistake. I think that's also important. That since they bring in a lot of experience, they probably worked in industry for long or have worked with our startups. So they also help you not, on guiding what not to do, which is also very important in a startup journey to figure out what are the things that you should not be doing. So it's not a bad idea, but as I said, you should be very clear what you are seeking from them, and you should be very clear in terms of the time they're going to devote and the value that you're going to extract out of it. Are they doing it pro bono? Are they doing it in expectation of any financial incentive? I think those are the conversation you should have before you get them on board.
Okay, sure. And second question is that is there any difference before having advisor on board before seed funding on the equity percentage? Likewise, if we'll not getting any seed funding and we'll have on board these advisors, so equity percentage would be less, or what is your take on this?
So I think that's your call whether you want to give any equity stake to these advisors. Typically, it is in small percentages, not very high. So you should not give disproportionate stake. For example, if he's investing, let's say 1 day a month, right, and you end up giving him 30% stake, then any investor will question, is this justified? So I think you have to be very clear that, and a lot of people actually, not for advisor, when they take angel money, they make this mistake because usually you're very desperate when you are seeking your seed round, and some angel comes and say, oh, guys, I'll give you 50 lakhs, but give me 30% of the company. And what happens in the next round that concerned that so and so has so much of stake and he's not adding enough value, and you also start regretting. So, and sometimes it becomes a challenge also for getting other investors in, because if you're given 30-40% in the very first round, and you have to raise 3 or 4 rounds, you don't have enough for yourself left after that, right? If the company grows significantly, that's fine. Even 5-10% is very valuable. But sometimes you get into situations where you are less than 30%. If there are 4 founders, each has 6-7%, and the stickiness can become a question. Founders start asking themselves, I'm doing all the hard work and someone else is making more money on me, etc. So I think good investors also understand that it's not about getting more stake, it's about being fair to the team, enlarging the pie rather than fighting for the share of the pie. So yeah, I think it's a very important question. You have to be very particular on your cap table.
Okay, I'll get it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So, are there any questions, or we can wind up now?
Yeah, I think Hemendra, we are done with the questions.
Okay.
So before leaving, just one question from my side.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to our startups so that in order to ensure a runway and how they can keep their head above the water during this unprecedented times. If you can share.
Yeah, Manvin, it's a very important question. I think it's with no right or wrong answer. All I can say: conserve cash, reduce your expenses. What you thought of spending in next 3 months, you probably need that money for next 9 months. So yeah, I think you have to sort of pin down. Sort of, you have to work from home, or you have to probably delay your next hiring, etc. But those are the ways to save cost. Um, so yeah, I think you should be thinking survival. There are going to be some hard decisions, hard measures which need to be taken. Um, Keep sharing. I also advise, since it's a great group. We all are family, right? So I think one thing which I find very positive in this situation is startups trying to come together to help each other. Even if it's not money, it's all about giving. There are some complementarities. For example, two startups can always share a tech resource, right? So I think you think on those innovative ways. How do we work more as a family in this situation? And I'm sure you guys must have met each other multiple times. And Manveen is there, Puran is there, I'm there, Saurabh is there, and we can also try and figure out how you can optimize your resource utilization rather than each one of you is trying to spend on your own. In some cases, probably not possible, but I think in many cases it should be possible to have shared resources. So yeah, you have to think creatively how to cut down on cost. Till the cash flows start trickling in. So yeah, be prepared for it. You should over communicate in those situations rather than under communicate with your investors, with your incubator, with your employees. I think that's also extremely important because everyone is going through this fear of psychosis and the depression and negativity. I think it's very important that you keep on talking to each other, keep talking to all the ecosystem players within the company, outside the company, even the customers who probably doesn't have money to pay you right now. Probably good to have conversation with them. There are few things you can even do in a lockdown period. Is like I'm sure some of you must be developing on tech, so that's pretty much possible even in a lockdown situation. Of course, physical movements, and if it's in manufacturing, etc. Those are other challenges, but hopefully that will be solved. But till the demand comes in, which may have a lag of few months, you have to keep telling yourself that I need to survive till situation become normal. And yeah, entrepreneurship is never easy. COVID or no COVID, it has a lot of hardships. So this is unusual hardship, but we must accept it. And I guess the pain is less if we collectively want to address it rather than individually. So Manveen, that's my advice. I hope it makes sense.
Okay, thanks a lot, Hemendra, for sparing your valuable time and also sharing your thoughts and communicating with our startups and solving their queries. So thank you once again for joining. And maybe the startups will like to connect with you offline also after the session, and they will keep disturbing you.
No problem. Most welcome, and I wish you all the best. Take care, stay safe, and stay positive. I will say stay positive, and I'm really dying to go back to the Himalayas. So let's hope we get a chance to physically meet. But hopefully later this year, if not earlier. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thanks a lot. Great. Okay, thanks team for joining, and we will connect again soon at 3 o'clock with the next session. Thanks a lot.